The spring of 1812 had been the season of Eleanor Ashford's greatest hopes and deepest humiliation. At 20 years of age, Lady Eleanor, only daughter of the Earl of Ashford, had entered London society with modest expectations. Her father's estate in Derbyshire was respectable but not grand, her dowry adequate but not impressive. She possessed what her mother called quiet beauty, dark chestnut hair that caught auburn lights in the sun, intelligent grey eyes, and a grace of manner that came from genuine kindness rather than calculated charm. She had not expected to catch the eye of Lord James Hartley, heir to the Marquis of Pemberton, one of the most eligible gentlemen in England. Yet he had pursued her with a determination that had set tongues wagging throughout Mayfair. He had claimed the first dance at Lady Wetherby's ball, had driven her through Hyde Park in his phaeton, had engaged her in conversations about poetry and philosophy that lasted hours. He had made her believe, foolish girl that she was, that he saw something in her beyond her social position. "You have a mind, Lady Eleanor," he had told her one afternoon in the Ashfords' drawing-room, his blue eyes earnest. "So many young ladies concern themselves only with fashion and gossip. You are different. You are exceptional." She had allowed herself to hope, to dream, to imagine a future as the Marchioness of Pemberton, not for the title, but because she had genuinely believed James cared for her. Then Miss Georgiana Blackwell had arrived in London. The daughter of a wealthy merchant who had purchased a baronetcy, Georgiana brought with her a dowry of £50,000 and her father's ruthless ambition to see her marry into the highest ranks of the peerage. She was beautiful in the conventional way, golden curls, china blue eyes, and a figure that drew admiring glances from every gentleman in the room. Eleanor had watched James's attention shift with the speed of a weather vane in a storm. Within a fortnight, he was dancing attendance on Miss Blackwell. Within a month, he was calling on her family daily. And then, at the Duchess of Richmond's ball, one of the grandest events of the season, James had approached Eleanor as she stood near the refreshment table. "Lady Eleanor," he had said, his tone carefully modulated to sound regretful, "I hope you will forgive my seeming inattention these past weeks. I have been much occupied with family matters." She had known what was coming, had felt it in the pitying glances from other young ladies, in the whispered conversations that ceased when she entered a room. "I must be honest with you," James continued, speaking just loudly enough that several nearby guests could hear. "I hold you in the highest regard, but I have come to realize that my duty to my family must take precedence over personal inclination. The Marquis requires that I make a match which will strengthen our family's position. I am sure you understand." The humiliation had burned through her like acid, not just the rejection, she might have borne that privately, but the public nature of it. The way he had essentially announced to society that she was not good enough, that her modest dowry and respectable but unremarkable family connections made her unworthy of his continued attention. "I understand perfectly, Lord Hartley," she had managed to say, her voice steady despite the mortification coursing through her. "I thank you for your honesty." She had maintained her composure through the remainder of the ball, had even danced twice more, though she could not afterward recall with whom. But when she returned home that night, she had wept until dawn. Within 6 weeks, James Hartley's engagement to Miss Georgiana Blackwell was announced in the Times. That had been 2 years ago, 2 years during which Eleanor had rebuilt herself, piece by careful piece. She had returned to London for the subsequent seasons, but now she approached society with clear eyes and a guarded heart. She conversed politely, danced when asked, and deflected questions about her matrimonial prospects with practiced grace. She had received a few offers, a baronet of middling years, a clergyman with more piety than charm, a third son seeking a wife to manage his modest household. She had declined them all. If she must marry for practical reasons rather than love, and her mother reminded her frequently that, at 22, she was rapidly approaching the dreaded status of spinster, then she would at least ensure the match provided security and respect. She had not expected a proposal from Alexander Blackwood, the Duke of Ravenscross. The Duke was a legend in English society, though not the romantic sort that inspired sighs from young ladies. At 32, he had held his title for 14 years. Since his father's death when Alexander was merely 18, he had taken a duchy on the brink of financial ruin and transformed it into one of the wealthiest estates in England through shrewd management and careful investment. He was known for his intelligence, his political influence, and his absolute refusal to suffer fools. He attended balls and social events as duty required, but remained aloof, dancing once or twice per evening and conversing only when necessary. His dark hair, striking green eyes, and tall, commanding figure made him attractive, but his cold demeanor ensured that most young ladies found him intimidating rather than appealing. Eleanor had met him only 3 times before he called upon her father. The first occasion had been at a political dinner hosted by Lord Castlereagh, where Eleanor accompanied her parents. The Duke had been seated near her father and had engaged in a brief discussion about the management of tenant farms. Eleanor had contributed an observation about crop rotation that her father's steward had mentioned, and the Duke had fixed her with those penetrating green eyes for a long moment before nodding thoughtfully. "An intelligent point, Lady Eleanor," he had said. "Your father is fortunate to have a daughter who takes interest in such practical matters." The second meeting had occurred at the theatre, where a chance arrangement of boxes had placed the Ashfords adjacent to the Duke. During the interval, he had inquired politely about Eleanor's opinion of the performance, a new production of The School for Scandal, and she had offered a critique of the lead actress's interpretation that had sparked an unexpectedly engaging conversation about Sheridan's wit and social commentary. The third meeting had been at Lady Pemberton's garden party only a week ago. Eleanor had been standing near the rose arbor, seeking a moment's respite from the crowds, when the Duke had approached. "Lady Eleanor," he had said without preamble, "I wonder if I might speak with you frankly." "Of course, Your Grace," she had replied, curious but not alarmed. "I find myself in need of a wife," he had stated, as directly as if he were discussing the weather. "I require someone intelligent, well-mannered, and capable of managing a ducal household, someone who will not bore me with frivolous conversation or harbor romantic illusions about our arrangement. I have observed you over these past months, and I believe you possess the qualities I seek." Eleanor had stared at him, momentarily speechless. "I am aware this is unorthodox," he continued, "but I prefer directness to the usual charade of courtship. My position and wealth would provide you with security and social prominence. Your intelligence and dignity would provide me with a suitable Duchess. I would expect discretion, competence, and civility. In return, I would offer respect, generous financial provision, and freedom to pursue your own interests within the bounds of propriety." "You are proposing marriage, Your Grace?" Eleanor had asked, still attempting to process this extraordinary conversation. "I am proposing a practical arrangement that would benefit us both," he had corrected. "I do not offer romantic declarations or promises of affection, but I do offer honesty and a partnership based on mutual respect." Eleanor had taken a steadying breath. Every practical consideration argued for acceptance. The Duke was wealthy, powerful, and, despite his cold manner, reportedly fair in his dealings. As his Duchess, she would have security, position, and protection. She would never again face the kind of humiliation James Hartley had inflicted upon her, and yet, some small part of her heart, the part that still remembered believing in love, hesitated. "Might I have time to consider, Your Grace?" she had asked. "Of course. I shall call upon your father in 3 days' time. You may send word before then if you wish to decline." He had paused, studying her with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. "I am aware of your history with Lord Hartley, Lady Eleanor. I mention this only to assure you that I would never treat you with such disrespect. Whatever else our marriage might be, it would be honorable." That simple statement, delivered without dramatics or false sentiment, had somehow meant more than any flowery declaration could have. Eleanor had spent 2 sleepless nights considering the Duke's proposal. She had made lists of advantages and disadvantages, had consulted her mother, who nearly fainted with excitement at the prospect, and had engaged in a frank conversation with her father. "He is not offering love, Papa," she had said quietly as they sat in his study. "He is offering a business arrangement." The Earl of Ashford, a kind man who genuinely cared for his daughter's happiness, had considered carefully before responding. "That is true, my dear, but I will tell you what I have observed of the Duke. He is a man of his word. He is fair to his tenants, generous to his servants, and scrupulous in his business dealings. He does not gamble recklessly or keep mistresses openly. He is respected by his peers and feared by his enemies." He had taken her hand gently. "You will not have romance, Eleanor, But you will have security, respect, and I believe kindness. That is more than many love matches provide." Her mother had been less philosophical. "The Duke of Ravenscross. Eleanor, you would be one of the highest-ranking ladies in England. You would have jewels, gowns, a London house, country estates, and such a handsome man, even if he is rather stern." In the end, Eleanor had made her decision based on one simple realization. She no longer believed in romantic love. James Hartley had cured her of that delusion. If she must marry, and at 22 with a modest dowry, her options would only diminish. Then she would choose a marriage based on honesty rather than pretty lies. She had sent word to the Duke that she would accept his proposal. When he had called upon her father, the negotiations had been brief and businesslike. The Duke was generous in his settlement, far more generous than necessary, and made provisions that would ensure Eleanor would be financially secure even if he died. He promised that she would have her own household budget to manage as she saw fit, her own carriage and freedom to pursue charitable works and intellectual interests. "When would you prefer the wedding to take place?" the Duke had asked Eleanor directly once the contracts were signed. "I leave that to your discretion, Your Grace," she had replied. "Alexander," he had corrected. "If we are to be married, we might at least use Christian names in private. I propose we marry by special license in 3 days' time. A small ceremony, family only. I see no purpose in a protracted engagement or a grand society wedding that would subject us both to tedious scrutiny." Eleanor had agreed, grateful to avoid months of whispered speculation and pitying glances. They had married in the drawing-room of Ashford House 3 days later, with only their immediate families present. The Duke, Alexander, had been punctual, properly dressed, and formally polite. He had spoken his vows in a clear, firm voice. He had kissed her cheek chastely when the ceremony concluded. "Well then, Lady Ravenscross," he had said, the title still strange to Eleanor's ears, "shall we proceed to the wedding breakfast?" It had been the most unromantic wedding imaginable. And yet, as Eleanor had signed her name in the register, Eleanor Blackwood, Duchess of Ravenscross, she had felt not disappointment, but relief. She had made a sensible choice. She would be safe, secure, and respected. She had not anticipated that she would face James Hartley quite so soon. The ball at Devonshire House was one of the first major social events of the season. The Duke and Duchess of Devonshire were renowned for their hospitality, and an invitation to their balls was coveted throughout society. Eleanor had not wanted to attend. She and Alexander had been married for only 3 days, and she felt unequal to facing the scrutiny of the ton quite so soon. But Alexander had been firm. "We will attend," he had said, as they sat across from each other at breakfast in their London townhouse in Berkeley Square. "Society will gossip regardless. Better to appear together, unified and indifferent to their speculation. You are the Duchess of Ravenscross now, Eleanor. Hold your head high." So she had dressed in a gown of deep sapphire silk that her mother had insisted upon ordering for the occasion. Alexander's wedding gift to her, a magnificent set of sapphires that had belonged to his grandmother, glittered at her throat and ears. Her maid had dressed her hair in an elegant arrangement that made her look, she had to admit, rather more sophisticated than she had ever appeared before. When she had descended the stairs to meet Alexander in the entrance hall, she had caught a flash of something, surprise, appreciation, in his eyes before his expression returned to its usual controlled politeness. "You look very well, Eleanor," he had said, offering his arm. "Shall we?" The carriage ride to Devonshire House had been brief and largely silent. Alexander had seemed preoccupied with his thoughts, and Eleanor had been too nervous to attempt conversation. When they arrived, the butler's announcement had caused a ripple of reaction through the assembled guests. His Grace the Duke of Ravenscross and Her Grace the Duchess of Ravenscross. Eleanor had felt dozens of eyes turned toward them. She had heard the whispers beginning immediately. The Duke was married. When had this happened? To whom? Alexander had kept her hand firmly on his arm as they made their way through the receiving line. The Duke and Duchess of Devonshire had greeted them warmly, though Eleanor had detected curiosity beneath their gracious manners. "How delightful to see you married at last, Ravenscross," the Duke of Devonshire had said, "and to such a charming bride. Lady Eleanor, forgive me, I should say, Duchess, you must bring your husband to dine with us soon." They had proceeded into the ballroom, and Eleanor had felt the weight of scrutiny intensifying. Young ladies whispered behind their fans. Dowagers leaned together, nodding significantly. Gentlemen studied Alexander with new interest, clearly reassessing the political implications of his marriage. Eleanor had been standing with her husband near one of the tall windows, accepting congratulations from Lord and Lady Castlereagh when she had seen him, James Hartley. He stood across the room, resplendent in evening dress, his golden hair carefully styled, his handsome face animated as he spoke with a group of gentlemen. Beside him stood his wife, for he had married Georgiana Blackwell the previous year, dressed in white silk and dripping with jewels that likely represented a significant portion of her father's fortune. Eleanor had felt her stomach tighten. She had known she would eventually encounter James in society, but she had hoped for more time to prepare herself. As if sensing her regard, James had looked up. Their eyes had met across the crowded ballroom, and he had smiled. That same charming, slightly mocking smile she remembered so well. He had said something to his wife, who had glanced toward Eleanor with poorly concealed disdain, then had begun making his way through the crowd. Eleanor's hand had tightened on her fan. Alexander, who had been conversing with Lord Castlereagh, had glanced down at her. "Are you quite well?" he had asked quietly. "Perfectly well," Eleanor had lied. James had approached with his characteristic confidence, his wife trailing slightly behind. "Lady Eleanor," he had said, deliberately using her former title, his voice carrying just far enough to be heard by nearby guests. "How unexpected to see you here. Still attending these events, I see." Eleanor had felt heat rise to her cheeks, but before she could respond, James had continued, his tone dripping with false concern. "Still without a husband, Lady Eleanor. What a pity. Though I suppose at your age, with your circumstances, it becomes increasingly difficult." He had smiled, a cruel edge beneath the charm. "Perhaps your expectations are simply too elevated for a young lady with such limited prospects. One must be realistic, after all." The words had landed like physical blows. Several nearby guests had drawn in sharp breaths. Georgiana Hartley had smiled behind her fan. Eleanor had felt 2 years of carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. The humiliation, the anger, the hurt she had buried so deeply, all of it had threatened to overwhelm her. And then she had felt it, a warm, possessive hand settling on her waist, a solid presence at her side, the subtle scent of sandalwood and something uniquely masculine. "I beg your pardon," Alexander had said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet space around them. "I believe you are addressing my wife." James had frozen, his smile faltering. "Your wife?" "Indeed." Alexander's tone had been perfectly polite, but there had been steel beneath the courtesy. "Allow me to introduce myself properly. Alexander Blackwood, Duke of Ravencross. And this," his hand had tightened slightly on Eleanor's waist, "is my Duchess, Eleanor Blackwood, formerly Lady Eleanor Ashford. We were married 3 days ago." The silence that had descended was absolute. Eleanor had watched, stunned, as the colour drained from James's face. His eyes had darted from Alexander to Eleanor and back again, clearly struggling to process this information. "The Duke of Ravencross?" James had managed, his voice strangled. "Forgive me," Alexander had continued, his tone now carrying an edge of disdain, "but I do not believe we have been introduced. You are—" The cut had been deliberate and devastating. To pretend not to know a Marquess's heir was an insult of the highest order. "Lord James Hartley," James had stammered, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Heir to the Marquess of Pemberton. This is my wife, Lady Hartley." "Ah, yes," Alexander had said, as if only now recalling. "I believe I am acquainted with your father. A decent man, if somewhat burdened by unfortunate investments of late. I trust he is in good health." Another cut, this one referencing rumours that the Marquess's fortune had been significantly diminished by his son-in-law's insistence on expensive renovations to Pemberton Hall. James had seemed unable to formulate a response. His wife had looked equally mortified, her earlier smugness replaced by poorly concealed panic. "I must commend your confidence, Lord Hartley," Alexander had continued, his voice dangerously soft. "To approach my wife and suggest she has limited prospects shows remarkable boldness. Ignorance, certainly, but remarkable nonetheless." I was not aware," James had begun. "Clearly," Alexander had drawn Eleanor closer, a gesture that was unmistakably protective and possessive. "My wife's prospects, I assure you, are quite satisfactory. As the Duchess of Ravenscross, she now ranks above every woman in this room save royalty. Her position in society is secure. Her future is assured. And she is—" He had paused, his green eyes boring into James with undisguised contempt, far too valuable to waste another moment on inconsequential conversation. With that, Alexander had smoothly guided Eleanor away, leaving James and his wife standing alone in a circle of fascinated onlookers. Eleanor had felt dizzy. The entire confrontation had lasted perhaps 2 minutes, but those 2 minutes had fundamentally altered her position in society. Where James had sought to humiliate her publicly, Alexander had instead elevated her, defended her, and simultaneously destroyed James's pretensions with surgical precision. "Breathe," Alexander had murmured as he led her toward the terrace doors. "Slowly, we shall step outside for air." The cool night air had been a relief after the suffocating atmosphere of the ballroom. Alexander had released her waist, but remained close, his presence a solid comfort. "Thank you," Eleanor had managed, her voice shaking. Thank you." "That man is a fool," Alexander had said flatly. "And his wife is clearly as mercenary as he is. They deserve each other." Eleanor had looked up at him, this man who was her husband, and for the first time had seen past the cold exterior to something warmer beneath. In the moonlight, his features had seemed less severe, almost handsome. "You defended me," she had said softly. "You did not have to do that. We both know this marriage is merely a practical arrangement." Alexander had turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable. "Eleanor, I told you when I proposed that I would treat you with respect. That man treated you abominably 2 years ago, and attempted to do so again tonight. I will not tolerate anyone showing such disrespect to my wife. Whether our marriage began as a practical arrangement or not, you are now the Duchess of Ravenscross. That means something, you mean something." Something had shifted in that moment. Some invisible wall between them had developed the first hairline crack. Before Eleanor could respond, they had been interrupted by the arrival of Lady Castlereagh, who had tactfully suggested they return to the ballroom to continue receiving congratulations from well-wishers. The remainder of the evening had passed in a blur of introductions and polite conversation. Eleanor had noticed that James and his wife had departed early, and that the gossip had shifted from speculation about her marriage to gleeful dissection of James's humiliation. By the time they had returned to the townhouse in Berkeley Square, Eleanor had been exhausted. They had stood together in the entrance hall, the house quiet around them. "Thank you again," Eleanor had said, "for what you did tonight, for what you said." Alexander had looked at her with those penetrating green eyes. "I meant every word, Eleanor. You are my wife. I protect what is mine." There had been something possessive in those words, something that had sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "Good night, Alexander," she had said softly. "Good night, Duchess." As Eleanor had climbed the stairs to her chambers, she had found herself thinking that perhaps this practical arrangement might prove more complex and more interesting than she had anticipated. The morning after the ball, Eleanor awoke in the grand ducal bedchamber that was now hers, sunlight streaming through the tall windows. The room was beautifully appointed in shades of cream and gold, far more luxurious than her chamber at Ashford House had been. A discreet knock at the door preceded the entrance of Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, followed by 2 maids carrying breakfast trays. "Good morning, Your Grace," Mrs. Winters said with a respectful curtsy. "His Grace requested that breakfast be brought to your room this morning, as he thought you might be fatigued after last evening's event." Eleanor sat up, pulling a wrapper around her shoulders. "That was thoughtful of him. Where is His Grace now?" "In his study, Your Grace. He asked that you join him there when you are dressed, if you are amenable. He said there are matters he wishes to discuss with you." After breakfast and with her maid's assistance, Eleanor dressed in a morning gown of pale green muslin. She took particular care with her appearance, though she could not have said exactly why. When she was ready, she made her way downstairs to Alexander's study. She knocked gently, and his voice called for her to enter. The study was a masculine room lined with bookshelves, dominated by a large mahogany desk. Alexander stood as she entered, setting aside the papers he had been reviewing. "Good morning," he said. "I trust you slept well?" Yes, thank you, and thank you for having breakfast sent up. That was kind. It was practical, he corrected, though his tone was not harsh. You were exhausted. There was no need for you to observe formal mealtimes in your own home. He gestured to a chair near his desk. Please sit. I wish to speak with you about several matters. Eleanor settled into the chair, curious. Alexander remained standing, one hand resting on the desk. First, he began, I want to ensure you understand the social implications of last night's events. By this afternoon, every drawing room in London will be discussing what occurred between you, myself, and Lord Hartley. The consensus will favour you. Society loves nothing better than seeing a presumptuous gentleman receive his comeuppance. However, you will face increased scrutiny and possibly some jealousy from other ladies who had hoped to secure the position you now hold. I understand, Eleanor said quietly. Good. I will not always be able to attend every social function with you. I have business and political obligations that will occasionally take me away from London. When that occurs, you will need to navigate society on your own. I have confidence in your ability to do so with grace and dignity. He moved to stand by the window, looking out over the garden. Second, I want to address the practical aspects of our marriage. You will have noticed that we maintain separate bedchambers. That arrangement will continue. I will not impose upon you in that regard unless and until we both feel it appropriate. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, but appreciated his directness. I see. However, Alexander continued, turning to face her, I do require an heir. Eventually. When you feel comfortable, we can discuss that aspect of our arrangement. There is no immediate urgency. That seems reasonable, Eleanor managed. Third, I want you to understand your position and your authority in this household. You are the Duchess of Ravenscross. The household staff answers to you. The management of our social calendar is your responsibility. You have an annual household allowance of £3,000, more if you require it for legitimate expenses. Mrs. Winters will help you understand the systems already in place, but you have authority to make changes as you see fit. Eleanor's eyes widened. £3,000 was more than her father's entire annual income from his estate. That is very generous. It is appropriate, Alexander corrected. You will have expenses, clothing, charitable donations, gifts, entertainment costs. I will not have my Duchess appearing in shabby gowns or unable to host properly. He returned to the desk and withdrew a small box from a drawer. Which brings me to my final point. Last night you wore my grandmother's sapphires. They suit you well. However, you will need additional jewellery for various occasions. He placed the box on the desk and opened it. Inside lay an exquisite pearl necklace with a diamond clasp, accompanied by matching earrings and a bracelet. Eleanor gasped. Alexander, these are beautiful, but they are yours, he said simply. There are more pieces in the vault, emeralds, rubies, diamonds. Mrs. Winters will show you the collection. Choose what appeals to you. This is too much, Eleanor protested. You have already been so generous with the marriage settlement and— Eleanor, he said her name firmly, drawing her attention to his face. You are my wife. You represent me and this family in society. You will be appropriately adorned. This is not generosity, it is necessity. Moreover, he paused, something flickering in his expression. You are not the mercenary fortune hunter that man implied last night. You agreed to marry me for practical reasons, yes, but not out of greed. I will not have you feeling like a purchased commodity. These gifts are freely given. Something in his tone made Eleanor's throat tighten. She stood, moving closer to him. You are not at all what I expected, Alexander. No? One dark eyebrow arched slightly. What did you expect? I thought you would be cold, indifferent. I thought this would be a marriage in name only, where we lived separate lives under the same roof. And now I think— Eleanor chose her words carefully. I think you are a man who values honor and fairness. I think beneath that stern exterior, you are perhaps kinder than you wish people to know. For a long moment, Alexander simply looked at her, his green eyes searching her face. Then, unexpectedly, one corner of his mouth lifted in what might almost have been a smile. You are perceptive, Duchess. That could prove either very convenient or very dangerous. Dangerous? Eleanor felt bold enough to smile slightly. Should I be concerned? Only if you dislike having your illusions shattered. I am not a romantic hero from one of Mrs. Radcliffe's novels, Eleanor. I am a practical man who built his fortune through hard work and careful planning. I do not write poetry or make grand gestures. I do not want poetry or grand gestures, Eleanor said honestly. I had enough of pretty words from Lord Hartley. They meant nothing. What you did last night, defending me, protecting my dignity, that meant everything. Something shifted in Alexander's expression. His hand lifted, almost as if he might reach for her, but then he seemed to think better of it and lowered it again. We should discuss your schedule for the week, he said, his tone becoming businesslike once more, though Eleanor thought she detected the faintest hint of warmth beneath it. There are several invitations that require responses, and Lady Castlereagh has requested your presence at a ladies' tea on Thursday. I recommend you accept. It will be an opportunity to establish your position among the leading hostesses of the ton. They spent the next hour discussing various social obligations and household matters. Eleanor was impressed by Alexander's thorough knowledge of society's complex web of relationships and his astute understanding of social politics. As she was preparing to leave, Alexander called her back. Eleanor, one more thing. She turned, curious. If you encounter Lord Hartley again, and you will inevitably, do not allow him to make you doubt yourself. He is a weak man who sought to elevate himself by diminishing you. His opinion is worthless. Do not give it power. Eleanor smiled, genuinely moved. Thank you, Alexander. I shall try to remember that. As she left the study, she found herself thinking that her practical, unromantic husband had just said something more meaningful than all of James Hartley's flowery compliments combined. The following days brought a deluge of social obligations. Visiting cards piled up in the entrance hall. Invitations arrived by every post. Eleanor found herself thrust into the role of Duchess of Ravenscross with little time to adjust. Lady Castlereagh's tea on Thursday proved to be exactly what Alexander had predicted, an opportunity for the leading ladies of society to assess her and determine where she fit in their carefully structured hierarchy. The gathering was held at Lady Castlereagh's elegant townhouse in St. James's Square. When Eleanor arrived, she found herself in the company of a dozen of the most influential women in London, the Duchess of Devonshire, Lady Jersey, Lady Cowper, and several others whose approval could make or break a young lady's social standing. Your Grace, Lady Castlereagh greeted her warmly. How delightful that you could join us. Do come and sit with us. We are all most eager to become better acquainted with Ravenscross's bride. The afternoon proceeded with the delicate dance of high society conversation. The ladies were too well bred to ask directly impertinent questions, but they probed nonetheless, seeking to understand this young woman who had seemingly appeared from nowhere to secure one of the most eligible matches in England. It was such a surprise to learn of your marriage, Lady Jersey said, her sharp eyes assessing Eleanor over her teacup. We had quite given up on Ravenscross ever taking a bride. What on earth convinced him to abandon his bachelor state? Eleanor smiled politely. I believe His Grace decided it was time to think of establishing his nursery. As for why he chose me, you would have to ask him. I confess I was as surprised as anyone by his proposal. You must have made quite an impression, Lady Cowper observed. Ravenscross is notoriously particular. We have watched scores of young ladies attempt to capture his attention over the years. None succeeded. Perhaps, Eleanor said carefully, His Grace valued intelligence and compatibility over mere beauty or fashion. The Duchess of Devonshire laughed. Tactfully said, my dear, and quite true. Ravenscross would never tolerate a silly wife. He requires someone who can hold her own in conversation and manage his households competently. I suspect he chose very wisely indeed. I witnessed the encounter at our ball, Lady Cowper said, leaning forward with interest. With Lord Hartley. How mortifying that must have been for him, to discover you had married so far above him. I confess, Eleanor said, choosing her words carefully. I took no pleasure in Lord Hartley's discomfort. However, I was grateful for my husband's support. He made it clear that he would not tolerate disrespect toward me. Ravenscross is fiercely loyal to those he considers his, Lady Castlereagh said approvingly. You will find, Your Grace, that being his Duchess provides considerable protection. No one will dare slight you now. I have heard, Lady Jersey said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp, that your courtship was quite brief. Some might even say, hasty. Eleanor met her gaze steadily. His Grace and I both valued directness over protracted uncertainty. When two practical people find themselves suited to one another, what purpose does delay serve? A refreshingly pragmatic view, the Duchess of Devonshire said. Not the stuff of romantic novels, perhaps, but far more likely to result in a stable marriage. I applaud you both. The conversation moved to other topics, the latest fashions from Paris, the upcoming royal event at Carlton House, speculation about which young ladies would secure matches this season. Eleanor participated when appropriate but mostly listened, learning the subtle currents of influence and rivalry that flowed beneath the surface of polite conversation. As the afternoon concluded and guests began to depart, Lady Castlereagh drew Eleanor aside. "You handled yourself admirably, my dear," she said quietly. "These ladies can be rather intimidating, I know, but you met them as an equal. That is precisely what Ravenscross's Duchess must do. I suspect you will do very well indeed. Thank you, Lady Castlereagh. Your kindness means a great deal to me. One more word of advice, if I may?" Lady Castlereagh's expression turned serious. "Your husband is a powerful man with considerable political influence. That makes him valuable as an ally and dangerous as an enemy. There are those who will attempt to use you to gain access to him or to learn information about his business dealings and political positions. Be cautious about whom you trust." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I shall remember that." As her carriage returned her to Berkeley Square, Eleanor reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in less than a week. She had gone from being a young woman of modest prospects to one of the most highly ranked ladies in England. It was dizzying and more than a little frightening. When she arrived home, she found Alexander in the drawing room, reviewing correspondence. He looked up as she entered. "How was Lady Castlereagh's tea?" he asked. "Educational," Eleanor said, settling into a chair across from him. "The ladies were polite, but assessing. I believe I passed their evaluation, though Lady Jersey seemed skeptical about the swiftness of our courtship." Alexander's mouth twitched. "Sally Jersey is skeptical about everything. If she were not, she would not be one of the most influential patronesses of Almack's. Did she trouble you?" "No. I managed adequately, I think. Lady Castlereagh was kind. She also warned me that people might attempt to use me to gain information about your business or political affairs. Emily Castlereagh is a wise woman. Her advice is sound." Alexander set aside his papers and gave her his full attention. "You will be approached, Eleanor. People will befriend you, flatter you, attempt to learn what you know. Be circumspect. Never discuss my business with anyone outside this household." "I understand, though I confess I know very little about your business affairs anyway." "Would you like to know more?" The question surprised her. Yes, actually, I would." Alexander considered for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. I have a meeting next week with my man of business to review the quarter's accounts for my various estates and investments. If you wish, you may attend. It will be tedious, much discussion of crop yields, tenant rents, and mining operations, but it will give you a fuller picture of how this family's wealth is managed." Eleanor felt a surge of unexpected pleasure. "You would permit me to attend such a meeting?" "Eleanor, you are my wife. You have a stake in these affairs. Moreover, if something should happen to me before we have a son of age, you would need to understand the business until our heir reaches his majority. It is only practical that you be informed." Practical. That word again. And yet, Eleanor found herself touched by the implicit trust in his offer. "I would very much like to attend," she said. "Thank you." That evening they dined together, a first as they had previously maintained the habit of separate meals due to Alexander's unpredictable schedule. The conversation flowed more easily than Eleanor had expected. Alexander asked intelligent questions about her impressions of various society ladies, and she ventured to ask about his work in the House of Lords. "I am currently concerned about proposed changes to the corn laws," he admitted. "The restrictions on grain imports are causing significant hardship for working people while protecting the interests of large landowners. It is a complicated issue. I am a landowner myself, after all, but I believe the current situation is untenable." "What position will you take?" Eleanor asked. "I will argue for modification of the laws to allow greater imports when domestic prices rise above a certain threshold. It will not make me popular with some of my peers, but it is the right course. Starving the poor to line the pockets of the wealthy is both immoral and ultimately destabilizing to social order. Eleanor found herself impressed by his willingness to take an unpopular stance based on principle rather than self-interest. "That is admirable, Alexander." He looked at her with surprise. "Most ladies would find such topics dreadfully dull." "I am not most ladies," Eleanor said with a slight smile. "My father's estate is not large, but I grew up understanding that our tenants' welfare affected our own. A starving tenant cannot pay rent, and a prosperous one can. It is simple logic, yet many landlords seem not to grasp it." "Your father taught you well," Alexander said. Then, after a pause, "Eleanor, I find I am enjoying your company more than I anticipated. That is, not a complaint." It was perhaps the most emotionally vulnerable statement he had made to her. Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest. "I'm enjoying your company as well, Alexander. This marriage may have begun as a practical arrangement, but I am discovering that compatibility and respect provide a firmer foundation than romantic fancy ever could." Something flickered in his green eyes, pleasure perhaps or relief. "I am glad you think so." As the evening concluded and they prepared to retire to their separate chambers, Alexander caught her hand gently. "Eleanor," he said, his voice quieter than usual, "I want you to know that I do not regret our marriage. I chose well." Then, before she could respond, he lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture far more intimate than their chaste wedding kiss had been. "Good night, Duchess," he murmured. "Good night, Alexander," she whispered, her hand tingling where his lips had touched. As Eleanor lay in bed that night, she found herself thinking about her husband in ways she had not anticipated. She had married him expecting cold formality. Instead, she was discovering a man of honor, intelligence, and, beneath his stern exterior, genuine kindness. It was not love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that might, in time, become far more than either of them had bargained for. Over the following weeks, Eleanor's life settled into a new rhythm. The season continued its whirl of balls, dinners, and social calls. She found herself growing more comfortable in her role as Duchess of Ravencross, and society seemed to accept her with increasing warmth, particularly after it became clear that she had the Duke's unequivocal support. James Hartley and his wife were rarely seen at the same events Eleanor attended, and when their paths did cross, James took great care to avoid her entirely. Eleanor found she felt nothing when she saw him. Not anger, not satisfaction, merely indifference. That chapter of her life was closed. What surprised her was the gradual deepening of her relationship with Alexander. It began with small things. Flowers appeared in her sitting room, not grand bouquets meant for display, but smaller arrangements of her favorite blooms, roses and lavender. When she mentioned them to Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper smiled knowingly. "His Grace noticed what flowers you paused to admire in the garden, Your Grace. He instructed the gardener to ensure fresh cuttings are brought to your rooms each week." Alexander himself never mentioned the flowers, but Eleanor noticed that he watched her reaction the first time she discovered a particularly beautiful arrangement, and something in his expression suggested he was pleased. Then there were the books. Alexander had one of the finest private libraries in London, and when he learned of Eleanor's love of reading, he began leaving volumes he thought she might enjoy on the table in her sitting room. Not the insipid romantic novels deemed appropriate for ladies, but works of history, philosophy, and even political economy. "I thought you might find this interesting," he would say casually, handing her a book on the agricultural innovations being implemented in Scotland, or a collection of essays on social reform. The author makes some compelling arguments about land management. They began spending their evenings together more frequently. After dinner, they would retire to the library, where Alexander worked on correspondence while Eleanor read. Often, their reading would spark conversations that lasted hours, debates about politics, discussions of history, analyses of the social issues confronting England. "You have a sharp mind," Alexander told her one evening after a particularly spirited discussion about the writings of Mary Wollstonecraft. "I find myself looking forward to these conversations. Most people simply agree with whatever I say, or if they disagree, cannot articulate why. You challenge me. It is refreshing." "I hope I am not too disputatious," Eleanor said, suddenly concerned that she had overstepped. "Not at all." Alexander's expression was warmer than she had ever seen it. "I married you for your intelligence, Eleanor. I would be disappointed if you concealed it merely to be agreeable." The gifts continued, a beautiful shawl in her favorite shade of blue, a first edition of a book she had mentioned wanting to read, chocolates from a confectioner in Bond Street that she had once praised in passing. "You are spoiling me," she protested, after discovering an exquisite pair of emerald earrings in her jewelry box. "I am providing for my wife," Alexander corrected, though his eyes held a hint of amusement. "There is a difference. Alexander, you have already given me so much." "Eleanor," he stepped closer, his expression serious. "I have wealth beyond what I could spend in 10 lifetimes. What purpose does it serve if not to provide pleasure to those I—" He stopped abruptly, seeming to reconsider his words. "To those under my protection," he finished. Eleanor wondered what he had almost said instead. The turning point came one afternoon in late May. Eleanor had been visiting one of the charitable institutions she had begun to patron, an orphanage in Suffolk that provided education and training to destitute children. She had mentioned to Alexander her desire to do meaningful charitable work, and he had not only approved, but had provided generous funding. She returned to Berkeley Square that afternoon, tired but satisfied, her dress dusty from the orphanage's crowded conditions. As she entered the house, she nearly collided with Alexander in the entrance hall. "Goodness," she exclaimed, "I did not expect you home so early." He steadied her with his hands on her shoulders, then frowned. "You are covered in dust. Where have you been?" "The orphanage in Suffolk. We were organizing the new schoolroom, and I fear I got rather more involved in moving furniture than was strictly necessary." "You were moving furniture?" His frown deepened. "Eleanor, you have servants for such tasks." "The children were so excited about their new school space. I could hardly stand by doing nothing." She smiled up at him. "Besides, I am perfectly capable of moving a few chairs." For a long moment, Alexander simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a genuine laugh that transformed his usually stern features. "You are extraordinary," he said, his hands still resting on her shoulders. "Most duchesses consider it beneath their dignity to even visit such establishments, let alone roll up their sleeves and work alongside the staff." "Then most duchesses are missing the satisfaction of genuine accomplishment," Eleanor replied. "Writing a bank draft is charitable, certainly, but seeing those children's faces when they entered their new schoolroom, that was worth a bit of dust." Something shifted in Alexander's expression. His hands slid from her shoulders to frame her face, his thumbs gently brushing her cheeks. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Her heart began beating faster. "Yes? This marriage, this practical arrangement, it has become something more for me. I did not anticipate it. I did not plan for it, but I find that I—" He paused, seeming to struggle with unfamiliar emotions. "I find that I care for you, deeply, not merely as the woman I married for practical reasons, but as yourself. Your intelligence, your kindness, your spirit, they have captivated me." Eleanor's breath caught. "Alexander, I am not skilled at pretty speeches," he continued, his green eyes intense. "I cannot offer you poetry or romantic declarations, but I can offer you honesty. You have become important to me, Eleanor, more important than I knew anyone could be, and He took a breath. "I would very much like our marriage to become more than a mere arrangement, if you are willing." Eleanor felt tears prickling her eyes, not tears of sadness but of overwhelming emotion. This stern, practical man who claimed not to understand romance had just offered her something more precious than any flowery declaration, complete honesty and genuine feeling. "I am willing," she whispered. "More than willing. You have shown me what real devotion looks like, Alexander. Not pretty words, but consistent actions. Not grand gestures, but daily kindness. I did not expect to feel this way when I married you, but I find that I have come to care for you deeply as well." The kiss, when it came, was nothing like their chaste wedding kiss. It was passionate, demanding, and yet somehow tender, an expression of feelings too powerful for words. Eleanor's arms went around his neck, and his pulled her close as if he could not bear to have any distance between them. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "I should let you rest," he said, though he made no move to release her. "You have had a long day." "Alexander," Eleanor said softly. "Yes? I think perhaps we need not maintain separate chambers any longer, if you agree." His arms tightened around her. "Are you certain?" I do not wish to rush you. I am certain. She looked up at him, her grey eyes meeting his green ones. I want to be your wife in every sense, Alexander. Not because of duty or the need for an heir, but because I want to be close to you. The heat in his gaze made her breath catch. Tonight, then, he said, his voice rough. Come to my chamber tonight, Eleanor. Let me show you how precious you have become to me. That evening, Eleanor dismissed her maid early and made her way to Alexander's chamber with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. He was waiting for her, dressed in a brocade dressing gown, his dark hair slightly disheveled in a way that made him look younger and less severe. Eleanor, he breathed as she entered. You came. Of course I came. Did you doubt I would? I doubted my own worthiness, he admitted. I am not an easy man, Eleanor. I am too serious, too focused on duty. You deserve someone who can sweep you off your feet with romance and poetry. Eleanor crossed the room to stand before him. I tried romance and poetry with James Hartley. They meant nothing because there was no substance beneath them. You have given me something far more valuable: respect, trust, and genuine care. That is worth more than all the poetry in the world. What followed was tender and passionate in equal measure. Alexander was careful with her, attentive to her comfort and pleasure, and when the initial discomfort faded, Eleanor discovered a physical connection as deep and satisfying as their intellectual partnership had become. Afterward, as they lay together in the lamplight, Alexander held her close, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. I love you, he said quietly. I did not think I was capable of such feeling, but I love you, Eleanor. You have transformed my life. Eleanor turned in his arms to look at him. And I love you, Alexander, completely and truly. He kissed her again, softly this time, a seal on promises spoken and unspoken. I never imagined, Eleanor murmured against his chest, when I accepted your practical proposal, that I would find such happiness. Nor did I, Alexander admitted. I thought I was arranging a convenient marriage. Instead, I found my match, my partner, my love. You are everything I did not know I needed, Eleanor. They talked long into the night, sharing confidences and dreams, building the foundation of a marriage that had already become far more than either had anticipated. From that night forward, Eleanor moved into Alexander's chambers permanently, and their marriage blossomed into something neither practical nor convenient, but rather passionate, devoted, and deeply fulfilling. Society, of course, noticed the change. The Duke and Duchess of Ravencross were observed to be remarkably attentive to one another, dancing together frequently, conversing with evident pleasure, and displaying a level of affection unusual among couples of their rank. The Duke is quite besotted, Lady Jersey observed to Lady Cowper at one particularly crowded ball. Who would have thought it? Cold Ravencross, warm at last. She has been good for him, Lady Cowper agreed, and he clearly adores her. Look how he watches her, as if she is the only person in the room. Indeed, Alexander's devotion became legendary. He was observed bringing her refreshments before she asked, ensuring she was comfortable, and cutting short conversations with boring guests to return to her side. He consulted her opinions on matters of business and politics, trusted her judgment on social matters, and made it clear to everyone that his Duchess was his partner in all things. For Eleanor, the transformation was equally profound. The wounded young woman who had accepted a loveless marriage for security had blossomed into a confident Duchess who knew she was cherished. She moved through society with grace and assurance, secure in her position and in her husband's affection. They encountered James Hartley one more time that season at a garden party hosted by the Duke of Richmond. Eleanor saw him across the lawn and felt nothing but mild pity. He looked older somehow, his face drawn, and his wife appeared perpetually discontented. Alexander, noticing her glance, drew her closer. "Regrets?" he asked quietly. "None whatsoever," Eleanor replied honestly. "I am grateful to him, actually." "Grateful?" Alexander's eyebrow rose. "If he had not rejected me so publicly, I would never have been available when you decided to marry. His cruelty led me to you. How can I regret that?" Alexander's expression softened. "You are generous, my love. Far more generous than he deserves." "I am simply happy," Eleanor said, looking up at him. "Deliriously, perfectly happy, with you." He kissed her forehead, unconcerned with who might observe. "And I with you. always. As the season drew to a close and they prepared to remove to Ravenscross Abbey, Alexander's primary estate in Hampshire, Eleanor reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. She had entered into marriage expecting mere security and respect. Instead, she had found passionate love, genuine partnership, and a happiness she had never imagined possible. "Are you pleased to leave London?" Alexander asked as they travelled southward in their luxurious carriage. "I am pleased to be wherever you are," Eleanor replied simply, "whether that is London, Hampshire, or anywhere else in the world." Alexander pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, perfectly content. Their practical arrangement had become a love match. And Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that she was the most fortunate woman in all of England. Ravenscross Abbey proved to be even more magnificent than Eleanor had imagined. The great house, built in the Elizabethan era and modernized over successive generations, sprawled across a landscaped park that encompassed woodlands, formal gardens, and a picturesque lake. "This is your home now," Alexander said as their carriage approached the house, his hand covering hers. "I hope you will be happy here." "How could I not be?" Eleanor breathed, taking in the golden stone walls and mullioned windows that glowed in the afternoon sun. "It is beautiful, Alexander." The household staff had assembled to greet their new mistress, and Eleanor was gratified by the warmth of their reception. Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper at Ravenscross, was a matronly woman with kind eyes who seemed genuinely delighted to welcome a duchess to the estate. "We have all been hoping His Grace would marry," she confided as she showed Eleanor through the house. "This great place needs a family to make it truly a home, and if I may be bold, Your Grace, His Grace seems remarkably happy. The staff have all noticed the change in him." Over the following weeks, Eleanor settled into country life with surprising ease. She worked with Mrs. Patterson to understand the household's rhythms, visited the tenants with Alexander to learn about estate management, and began planning improvements to the estate's small school and almshouse. But the greatest change came in her relationship with Alexander. Away from the scrutiny and formality of London society, they were free to simply be themselves, a husband and wife who genuinely delighted in each other's company. They rode together most mornings, exploring the estate's extensive grounds. Alexander was an excellent horseman, and he patiently helped Eleanor improve her skills, his hands steadying her waist as he gave instructions, his praise generous when she mastered a new technique. "You are a natural," he told her, after she successfully jumped a low fence for the first time. "I knew you had the courage for it." "I am merely motivated by your confidence in me," Eleanor replied, flushed with pleasure. "You make me believe I can accomplish anything." "You can," he said seriously. "You are one of the most capable people I know, Eleanor. Never doubt that." Their evenings were spent in comfortable companionship. Sometimes Alexander worked on estate business while Eleanor read or worked on her correspondence. Sometimes they played chess or card games. Often they simply talked, sharing their thoughts on everything from philosophy to the day's small domestic concerns. And their nights were filled with increasing passion and tenderness. Alexander proved to be an attentive and generous lover, and Eleanor discovered depths of feeling and sensation she had never imagined. Their physical intimacy deepened their emotional connection, creating a bond that felt unbreakable. "I never knew marriage could be like this," Eleanor confessed one night as they lay tangled together, the moonlight streaming through the windows. "I thought it would be duty and obligation. Instead, it is joy." Alexander's arms tightened around her. "You have taught me what it means to truly love someone, Eleanor. Before you, I understood duty, responsibility, honor, but I did not understand how it felt to care for someone more than myself, to want their happiness above my own. You have transformed me. We have transformed each other," Eleanor corrected softly. "I was so guarded when we married, Alexander, so afraid to be hurt again. You have shown me that trust and vulnerability are not weaknesses but strengths." In late August, Eleanor realized that her monthly courses had not arrived. A visit from the local physician confirmed what she had begun to suspect. She was with child. She told Alexander that evening as they sat together in the library after dinner. He had been reviewing accounts, and she had been attempting to focus on a book, but her mind had been too full of her news to concentrate. "Alexander," she said, setting her book aside, "I have something to tell you. He looked up immediately, catching the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Are you well?" "I am very well," she smiled. "I am expecting a child. We are going to have a baby." For a long moment, Alexander simply stared at her. Then his face broke into a smile of such radiant joy that Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. "A child," he whispered. "Eleanor, truly, truly. The physician confirmed it this afternoon. I am perhaps 2 months along. The baby will come in the spring." Alexander crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of glass. "Eleanor, my love, this is... I cannot find words. You have given me everything, everything. We have given each other everything," Eleanor corrected, tilting her face up for his kiss. That night Alexander was especially tender with her, treating her with such reverent care that she finally had to laugh. "I am not going to break, Alexander. Women have been bearing children since the beginning of time. Not my wife," he said stubbornly, "not the woman who holds my heart. I will not risk your health or comfort for anything." His protectiveness, while occasionally excessive, touched Eleanor deeply. Over the following months, as her body changed and the baby grew, Alexander ensured she had the finest care, the best food, and every comfort he could provide. He read medical texts about childbirth and pregnancy, questioning the physician about every detail. He had a resting couch installed in the library so she could be near him while he worked. He personally ensured that her favorite foods were always available and that the nursery was being prepared to the highest standards. "You are fussing," Eleanor told him one afternoon in December when she was nearly 7 months along and feeling ungainly. "I am perfectly healthy, Alexander. Women do not need to be wrapped in cotton wool merely because they are breeding." "My woman does," he said firmly. Then, more gently, "Humor me, Eleanor. You are carrying the most precious cargo in the world, our child and yourself. Let me take care of you." How could she argue with that? London society heard of the Duchess's condition through the carefully worded announcement Alexander had inserted in the newspapers. Congratulations poured in, along with gifts and letters of advice from seemingly every lady in England who had ever borne a child. Among the letters was one from Eleanor's mother, filled with motherly advice and excitement about becoming a grandmother. But there was also a brief note from a source Eleanor had not expected, Lady Castlereagh. "My dear Duchess," it read, "I am delighted to hear of your happy news. Ravenscroft is one of the finest men I know, and I am certain he is beside himself with joy and concern. Do not let him fuss too much. Husbands can be trying in their protectiveness, but it comes from a place of love. I hope you will return to London for the season after your confinement. Society has been dreadfully dull without the Duke and Duchess of Ravenscroft to enliven it. Your devoted friend, Emily Castlereagh." Eleanor smiled at the note. She had made genuine friends in London, she realized. Women who valued her for herself, not merely for her position. There was no communication from James Hartley or his wife, which was exactly as Eleanor preferred. That chapter of her life was so thoroughly closed that she rarely thought of them at all. Winter settled over Hampshire, blanketing Ravenscroft Abbey in snow. Eleanor found she loved the estate in winter. The way the frost sparkled on the windows, the roaring fires in every room, the sense of cozy intimacy as the household drew closer together against the cold. On Christmas Eve, Alexander gave her a gift that made her weep, a miniature portrait of the two of them, painted by a talented local artist based on sketches he had commissioned without her knowledge. "So our child will always know how we looked in these early days of our marriage," Alexander explained, his hand resting gently on her swollen belly. "I want them to see how much we loved each other even before they arrived." "Alexander," Eleanor whispered, "you are going to make me cry, and I am already overly emotional." He kissed her tears away gently. "I love you, Eleanor, more than I have words to express. You have given me a life I never imagined I could have, a home filled with love instead of merely duty. And now a child. You are my entire world." "And you are mine," Eleanor replied, her hand covering his where it rested on her belly. "Always." The baby came on a bright April morning, arriving with considerably less drama than everyone had feared. Eleanor's labor was relatively brief, and when Alexander was finally allowed into the chamber to meet his child, he found Eleanor tired but glowing with joy, cradling a tiny bundle in her arms. "Alexander," she said softly, "come meet your daughter." A daughter. Alexander approached almost reverently, his eyes wide as he looked down at the tiny, perfect face. "She is beautiful," he whispered. "Perfect, like her mother. Would you like to hold her?" Eleanor asked. With exquisite care, Alexander took his daughter into his arms. The baby's eyes, already showing hints of the green she would inherit from her father, blinked up at him solemnly. And in that moment, Alexander Blackwood, the powerful Duke of Ravenscross, fell completely and helplessly in love for the second time in his life. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I am your papa, and I promise you, I will spend every day of my life ensuring you are happy, safe and loved. You and your mama, you are my everything." They named her Catherine Eleanor Blackwood, in honor of both Alexander's grandmother and Eleanor herself. Little Catherine, or Kate as she quickly became known, proved to be a contented baby, with her mother's gentle temperament and her father's striking eyes. Alexander was a devoted father, surprising even Eleanor with his hands-on involvement in his daughter's care. He insisted on spending time with Kate daily, holding her while Eleanor rested, talking to her about everything from estate management to philosophy, as if she could understand every word. "She is a brilliant listener," he told Eleanor seriously. "Very attentive." "She is 3 months old," Eleanor laughed. "She is listening to the sound of your voice, not the content. Nonetheless, it is never too early to begin her education." Watching Alexander with their daughter filled Eleanor with a joy so profound it sometimes made her breathless. This stern, practical man who had proposed a convenient marriage had become the most loving of husbands and devoted of fathers. He proved that love could grow from respect and trust, that passion could develop from compatibility, and that the strongest bonds were built on honesty and genuine care. When Kate was 6 months old, they returned to London for the season. Eleanor had regained her figure and felt more confident than ever in her position. As they entered the first ball of the season, hosted once again by the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire, they caused quite a stir. "The Duke and Duchess of Ravenscross are positively radiant," Lady Jersey observed. "Marriage and parenthood have clearly agreed with them." Indeed, Alexander and Eleanor were observed to be as attentive to each other as ever, perhaps even more so. They danced together repeatedly, conversed with evident pleasure, and made it clear that their devotion had only deepened with time. Eleanor caught sight of James Hartley across the ballroom. He looked older now, his face lined with dissatisfaction. His wife stood nearby, clearly haranguing him about something, her expression pinched and unhappy. They were, Eleanor realized with a mixture of pity and satisfaction, exactly what they deserved to be, miserable together. As if sensing her regard, James looked up. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Eleanor smiled, not with triumph or malice, but with genuine contentment. She had nothing to prove to James Hartley. She had found real love, genuine partnership, and perfect happiness. James's expression flickered, recognition, regret, perhaps even shame before he looked away. "Thinking of your past?" Alexander murmured, appearing at her side and placing his hand on her waist in that possessive gesture she had come to love. "Only long enough to be grateful for it," Eleanor replied honestly. "If James had not been cruel, I might have accepted one of those lesser offers and never been available when you decided to marry. His rejection led me to you. I cannot regret that." "Then I suppose I should thank him," Alexander said, though his tone suggested he would do no such thing. "Though I prefer to simply be grateful for my extraordinary good fortune in securing you as my wife." "Our mutual good fortune," Eleanor corrected. "I am equally blessed, Alexander." He kissed her temple, unconcerned with propriety or watching eyes. "Dance with me again, Duchess. Let all of London see that the Duke of Ravenscross is hopelessly devoted to his wife." "Gladly, Your Grace," Eleanor replied with a smile. As they moved together through the familiar patterns of the waltz, Eleanor reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. She had entered marriage expecting mere security and respect. Instead, she had found passionate love, genuine partnership, and a happiness beyond anything she had imagined possible. She had been rejected and humiliated by a man who valued wealth over character, status over substance. That pain had led her to accept a practical proposal from a stern duke who promised only honesty and respect, and from that practical beginning had grown the greatest love story Eleanor could have imagined. Not a fairy tale of love at first sight or romantic declarations, but something deeper and more real. A partnership built on trust, respect, and genuine care that had blossomed into profound and lasting love. "What are you thinking?" Alexander asked as they danced. "That I am the most fortunate woman in England," Eleanor replied honestly. "That I love you beyond measure. And that our daughter is the perfect embodiment of our love." "Our daughter," Alexander repeated, his eyes softening. "And perhaps, in time, a brother or sister for her, if you are willing?" "I am very willing," Eleanor whispered. "I want a house full of children, Alexander, a family built on love." "Then a family we shall have," he promised. "Everything you want, Eleanor. Always." As the music swelled and they moved together in perfect harmony, Eleanor caught sight of their reflection in one of the ballroom's tall mirrors. The Duke and Duchess of Ravenscross, powerful, respected, and quite obviously devoted to each other. A perfect partnership in every sense. James Hartley had mocked her, suggesting she had no prospects, implying she was not good enough. He had been spectacularly wrong. She had not only secured a position far above anything he could have offered, but she had found something infinitely more valuable: true love with a man who cherished her completely. "No regrets?" Alexander murmured against her ear. "None whatsoever," Eleanor replied, meeting his eyes. "Only gratitude. For you, for our daughter, for this life we have built together." "And I," Alexander said softly, "am grateful every day that you agreed to my practical proposal, that you gave me the chance to learn what love truly means. You are my life, Eleanor, my love, my everything." As the ball continued around them and London society watched with approval and perhaps a touch of envy, the Duke and Duchess of Ravenscross danced on, a perfect picture of what marriage could be when built on honesty, respect, and deepening affection. Eleanor had been publicly humiliated by a man who thought only of wealth and status. But that humiliation had led her to a man who valued intelligence, character, and genuine partnership. A man who had proven that the deepest love often grows from the most unlikely beginnings. And if James Hartley occasionally regretted his choices as he watched the Duke and Duchess of Ravenscross from across crowded ballrooms, if he wondered what his life might have been had he possessed the wisdom to value substance over superficiality, well, that was only fitting. Eleanor Blackwood, Duchess of Ravenscross, had everything she could want. A devoted husband, a beautiful daughter, security, respect, and most importantly, love. Real, deep, transformative love that grew stronger with each passing day. She had been rejected by a fool and chosen by a duke, but more importantly, she had been loved by a good man, and she loved him in return. And that, Eleanor thought as Alexander held her close and they moved together through the dance, was the greatest triumph of all. 5 years later, Ravenscross Abbey was no longer the quiet, formal establishment it had been when Eleanor first arrived. Now it rang with the laughter and chatter of children. Not only Catherine, now a lively 5-year-old with her father's intelligence and her mother's kindness, but also her younger siblings, 3-year-old Thomas, who had inherited his father's dark hair and serious demeanor, and baby Victoria, just 6 months old, and already showing signs of having her sister's sweet temperament. Eleanor stood at the nursery window, watching as Alexander played with Catherine and Thomas in the garden below. He had Kate perched on his shoulders, while Thomas clung to his leg, both children shrieking with delight as their dignified father pretended to be a fearsome beast stalking through the rose garden. "His Grace is very good with the children," Mrs. Patterson observed, coming to stand beside Eleanor with baby Victoria in her arms. Such a change from the serious young man who inherited this estate all those years ago. "Love changes people," Eleanor said softly, taking Victoria from the housekeeper and settling the baby against her shoulder. "It certainly changed both of us." Indeed, Alexander had continued to thaw over their years of marriage, becoming warmer and more openly affectionate not only with his family but with his staff and tenants as well. He was still formidable in business and politics, still commanded respect throughout England, but those who knew him well saw the genuine kindness beneath his stern exterior. And Eleanor had blossomed into a duchess in the truest sense, not merely holding a title, but actively working to improve the lives of those around her. Her charitable work had expanded to include 3 orphanages, 2 schools, and a hospital for the poor. She was respected throughout society, not just as the Duke's wife, but as a capable and compassionate woman in her own right. Their marriage had become the stuff of legend in London society. The love match Duke and Duchess, Lady Jersey had dubbed them, and the name had stuck. Young ladies sighed over their story, and young gentlemen were reminded by their mothers that true devotion and respect mattered more than superficial charm. As for James Hartley, Eleanor rarely thought of him anymore. She had heard through the ever-efficient society gossip network that his marriage remained unhappy, and that his father's finances had never recovered from the disastrous investments he had made. James had produced no heir, and there were rumors that his wife blamed him for her failure to conceive. Eleanor felt only pity for them both. They had sought wealth and status at the expense of genuine affection, and they had reaped exactly what they had sown. "Mamma, Mamma!" Catherine's voice called from below. "Come down, Papa says he will let us have ices if you agree." Eleanor laughed, opening the window to call down. "Did he indeed? And what makes you think I am the one who makes decisions about ices?" "Because Papa does whatever you say," Catherine replied with the devastating honesty of a 5-year-old. Alexander looked up, his face breaking into the warm smile he reserved only for his family. "She is not wrong, you know. Come down, my love. Enjoy this beautiful day with us." Eleanor's heart swelled with love as she looked at her family, her strong, devoted husband, her bright, beautiful children, her life that had exceeded every dream she had once thought impossible. "I shall be right down," she called, "but someone needs to convince me that ices before dinner is acceptable." "I love you," Catherine shouted. "Is that convincing?" "Very convincing indeed," Eleanor laughed. As she turned from the window, baby Victoria gurgling contentedly in her arms, Eleanor reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. She had begun as a young woman with modest prospects, been publicly humiliated by a man who valued wealth over character, and accepted a practical proposal from a stern duke who promised only honesty and respect. From that unpromising beginning had grown the deepest love, the truest partnership, and the most profound happiness Eleanor could have imagined. She had not married for love, but she had found it nonetheless. Found it, nurtured it, and watched it grow into something magnificent. "Come along, little one," she murmured to Victoria as she headed downstairs. "Let us join your papa and siblings. Let us enjoy this beautiful life we have been blessed with." As Eleanor emerged into the garden, and Alexander's face lit up at the sight of her, as Catherine and Thomas ran to embrace her, as her husband kissed her tenderly and took Victoria from her arms with practiced ease, she knew with absolute certainty that she was the most fortunate woman in all of England. Not because she had married a duke, though that had brought its own advantages. Not because she had wealth and status, though those had provided security and comfort. But because she had married a good man who loved her, who respected her, who cherished her and their children above all else. She had been rejected by a fool and chosen by a wise man. But more importantly, she had been loved, truly, deeply, passionately loved, by the best of men. And she loved him in return with every fibre of her being. And that, Eleanor thought as Alexander put his arm around her waist and they watched their children play together in the sunshine, was the greatest triumph of all. The practical marriage had become the love match of the century, and Eleanor Blackwood, Duchess of Ravenscross, lived happily ever after, not because of magic or fairy tale romance, but because she and her husband had chosen each other day after day, building a love that would last a lifetime. The end. Thank you for joining us on Eleanor and Alexander's journey. Their story reminds us that love can grow from the most unexpected beginnings, that respect and trust form the foundation of lasting happiness, and that the deepest connections are built through consistent care and genuine devotion. In a world that often values superficial charm over substance, Eleanor and Alexander found each other and built something real, something lasting, something beautiful. May we all be blessed with partnerships built on such solid ground. Until our next story, may you find your own happy ending, not through fairy tale magic, but through the very real magic of choosing to love and be loved in return. With love. The Legends of the Full Team. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel, leaving a like, sharing it with friends, and writing a comment below. Your support, from the bottom of our hearts, means everything to our small team, And it's what keeps us inspired to tell more stories filled with love, redemption, and dramatic turns of fate. At the end of this video, you'll see a recommendation for another unforgettable story from our channel. Click it and let yourself be swept away once more by the power of emotional, historical romance. With all our gratitude, the Legends of the Fall team.